Fair is foul, and foul is fair. Beware the fair and false. Trust not her words, whose beauty is her snare. We've always loved a warning, especially about women. Long before Dracula slinked through Gothic corridors, we were inventing women who ate children, stole infants, and emptied men of strength while they slept. These figures are older than Christianity, older than medieval demonology, and they tell us something ugly and useful about how societies tried to manage female desire. Tonight, we trace the family tree of the erotic vampire, the Lamia who feasted on love, Lilith who refused to be silenced, and the Succubi who made the night itself into danger. The Greek Lamia. Among the Greeks, no figure embodies the mingling of desire and dread more vividly than Lamia. Her story begins as tragedy and ends as terror. According to myth, Lamia was once a Libyan queen beloved by Zeus. But Hera, furious at yet another betrayal, struck back in the cruelest way. She either killed Lamia's children or, in some versions, cursed Lamia with an uncontrollable hunger that drove her to devour them herself. Grief warped into rage, and Lamia transformed into a monster who prowled the night. Some ancient accounts describe her as a child snatcher, slinking through darkened houses to steal infants from their cradles. Others cast her as a seductress who lured young men into her bed, only to drink their blood and devour their flesh. In both forms, she collapses the boundaries between mother and predator, lover and destroyer. Classicist Sarah Illes Johnston in Restless Dead argues that Lamia represents cultural fears of women who transgress maternal roles, turning the figure of the mother into a predator. By the Hellenistic period, Lamia's image had shifted. She was invoked less as a literal child-eater and more as a vampiric figure who drained her lovers. Historian Daniel Ogden in Drakon, Dragon Myth and Serpent Cult in the Greek and Roman worlds, notes that Lamia and related beings like the Empusai were used as cautionary tales for young men, allegories warning against sexual excess and the dangers of succumbing to temptation. Even Philostratus, in his Life of Apollonius of Tyana, early 3rd century CE, recounts how the philosopher exposed a Lamia disguised as a beautiful courtesan, saving a young man from being devoured. In this retelling, Lamia isn't just a monster, she's a warning about deceptive female allure. But Lamia didn't stay locked in antiquity. Fast forward to the Romantic era. John Keats's long poem, Lamia, 1820, recast the snake woman as tragic and seductive. In Keats's telling, Lamia is undone not by divine wrath, but by the intrusion of cold philosophy, reason stripping away enchantment. His Lamia is both alluring and dangerous, literary proof that the monster woman could be eroticized as well as feared. That eroticized Lamia is one of the branches that later fed the image of the erotic vampire. And that's the power of her myth. As one critic notes, Lamia embodies myth's economy, one figure standing in for motherhood, sexual transgression, and the destabilizing effects of grief. She's less a literal monster than a cultural object, a story used to police behavior, a cautionary tale of what happens when a woman steps outside prescribed roles. So Lamia is never only a ghost story. She's an ancient expression of cultural anxiety, that women who embodied desire, who lived outside maternal or marital roles, became monstrous. In her, we glimpse the earliest outlines of the erotic vampire, beautiful, dangerous, and insatiable. Lilith. If Lamia haunted Greek imagination, Lilith haunted Jewish and Christian thought. She is one of the most infamous demonesses in Western lore. Her roots reach back to Mesopotamia, where the lilītu spirits in the Gilgamesh cycle were associated with the night, infertility, and infant death. Already she was linked to danger, a shadow hovering at the edges of childbirth and sexuality. By the Middle Ages, Jewish folklore had fully shaped the Lilith we recognize, Adam's first wife who refused to submit to him sexually, insisting she was his equal. In the Alphabet of Ben Sira, 8th to 10th century, when Adam commanded her to lie beneath him, she replied, "I will not lie beneath you, but above, for we are equal." Lilith then spoke the ineffable name of God and fled Eden. Her punishment was exile. Her reward was infamy. From there, she was recast as a winged demon who preyed upon newborns and seduced men in their sleep to drink their blood and steal their seed. Scholar Judith Plaskow, in The Coming of Lilith, 1972, writes that Lilith embodies the fear of women's insubordination and the fantasy of unchecked female sexuality. Lilith was not just a demon, she was the consequence of saying no. Kabbalistic tradition deepened her role. The Zohar describes her as the mate of Samael, the angel of death. Together they are called the Great Demon. From them comes forth all the legions of demons. In other mystical writings, Samael and Lilith are portrayed as being created at the same moment as Adam and Eve, a dark parody of the first couple, bound not for life, but for corruption. Gershom Scholem summarizes Lilith as a permanent consort of Samael, with whom she copulates endlessly and brings forth demonic offspring. Medieval texts portray her as both child-killer and seductress, blurring the lines between motherhood, lust, and mortality. Amulets were inscribed with angelic names to ward her off, protecting infants from her nightly predations. Art historian Diane Apostolos Capadona notes that Lilith became shorthand for female transgression, a symbol of uncontained desire that threatened both family and faith. And yet, while patriarchal myth demonized her, modern thought has reclaimed her. Biblical scholar Deborah Lyons calls Lilith the ultimate other, the woman who refuses, who desires, who terrifies. In feminist retellings, she is no longer a monster, but a mirror, the woman who chose autonomy over obedience. Her transformation into a vampiric archetype underscores the recurring pattern. Sexuality, especially female refusal or independence, is recast as monstrous. Lilith is not just the first wife of Adam, she is the first seductress, the first vampire, the first warning of what happens when a woman dares to claim her power. The Succubi and the Incubi. By the medieval and early modern period, Europe's nightmares had taken on new shapes. The Succubi and the Incubi. These weren't just fireside stories. They appeared in sermons, theological treatises, and even legal trials. To believe in demons of the night was to believe in the fragility of your own soul. Succubi were said to slip into the dreams of men, pressing down on their chests, seducing them into emissions that left the body drained and the spirit vulnerable. Their male counterparts, the incubi, targeted women, often invoked to explain mysterious pregnancies or encounters a woman could not or dared not name. The fear was codified in the Malleus Maleficarum of 1487, the notorious witch-hunting manual. One passage explains, "The demon in the form of a woman, that is, a succubus, draws the semen from a man. Then a demon in the form of a man, that is, an incubus, injects it into the woman." The text even insists that such corrupted unions could produce monstrous offspring. King James VI of Scotland, in his 1597 treatise Démonologie, wrote that the demons could interfere with human reproduction by stealing and corrupting the seed of a man. The message was unmistakable. Sexual activity outside the authority of the church was not only sinful, it was literally diabolical. Historians like Jeffrey Burton Russell read this obsession as social. When communities spoke about succubi and incubi, they were negotiating anxieties about the body, masculinity, impotence, and the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural. Sleep paralysis, erotic dreams, nocturnal emissions, and unlucky pregnancies all found a theological language: demonic visitation. That placed interpretation and control in the hands of clergy and magistrates. And there are case files to prove it. Under interrogation, men and women sometimes confessed to sexual encounters with demons. Some of these confessions were coerced through torture. Others were desperate attempts to explain behavior that had no other acceptable social explanation. The bottom line is this: succubi and incubi show how sex itself could be reframed as a moral and legal wrong by casting desire as predation. The accusations carried consequences. Women accused of witchcraft were often said to have lain with incubi, their supposed sexuality turned into proof of a pact with the devil. For men, the succubus was both an excuse and a punishment, a way of saying that lust, nocturnal dreams, even impotence could be blamed not on human weakness, but on supernatural attack. Have you noticed Lamia as predator, Lilith as the woman who refused, succubi as night demons feeding through sex? Again and again, female desire, or even the possibility of female agency, was written as monstrous. The erotic vampire was already waiting in the wings, centuries before Dracula, wearing the masks of myth and demonology. So how do we move from Lamia and Lilith to the erotic vampire of modern imagination? There are two moves: embodiment and eroticization. These figures are repeatedly recast as female bodies that transgress boundaries of motherhood, marital obedience, of sexual propriety, and later storytellers and artists sharpen the erotic edge. The vampire we love to fetishize is a late bloom of a very old anxiety. Scholars help us make sense of this arc. Nina Auerbach argues that vampires are versatile monsters that each age remakes to suit its social fears. The erotic vampire is one such remaking. Paul Barber and others have traced how cultural anxieties, from decomposition to immigration to sexual panic, shape vampire lore. Read together, these studies show a long cultural habit. Make women's desire monstrous so you can control it. Later, make the monster alluring so you can keep telling stories about transgression. From a feminist and psychoanalytic angle, Barbara Creed and Marina Warner point out a recurring pattern. Female reproductive power and sexual autonomy tend to be coded as abject or monstrous. That helps explain why Lamia eats children, why Lilith steals infants and seduces men, and why succubi are framed as life drainers. These myths aren't just about demons, they're about social order, crystallizing male fears into monster forms. These myths weren't random. They're cultural mirrors reflecting deep-rooted fears about women's bodies, their power, and their desire. The Lamia, Lilith, and the succubi stand as the earliest ancestors of the vampire. Erotic, deadly, and irresistible. They show us how centuries of storytelling have tied women's sexuality to sin and monstrosity. Next time you think of the vampire as a Gothic invention, remember, the seductress with fangs was already haunting human imagination for millennia. Join me next week as we move from myth to the body itself. The Gothic body is pale, beautiful, and deadly, where eternal youth hides peril and desire masks danger.